guest before the break, we have Robert Stainton, who is Distinguished University Professor of Philosophy from Western University. Robert's work is on the intersections of linguistics and philosophy, an area about which I am rather ashamedly ignorant, but I understand that he not only works in this area of the intersection of history, philosophy, and linguistics, but that he also has a group working on the impairments to linguistic pragmatics in autism spectrum disorders. So I'm waiting for you to enlighten me and the rest of us, perhaps, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is a tremendous, tremendous honor to be up here speaking and in this company, so I'm nervous and moved. So since 1987, when I was an undergrad at Glendon College at York University, I have mixed philosophy and linguistics, applying the one to the other. So in my 7 minutes, I thought I'd give you some examples of how that goes. So I started off at Glendon studying functional linguistics, and that was sort of outside the mainstream, and discovered philosophy of language there at the same time in my third year, and it was just so hard. And both of them were just so hard, much harder than anything else I'd been studying, and so that's why I decided I had to pursue that. And this foolishness led me to a PhD doing both linguistics and philosophy at MIT, where Chomsky was one of my supervisors, because of course I liked so hard. So let me start off talking about my first example of linguistics meets philosophy, which was during my PhD dissertation. I kept hearing in my philosophy classes from authors running all the way from Plato up to Bertrand Russell, how the complete sentence was primary in language, both in terms of meaning and thought and structure, and that words were had meaning only because they were parts of sentences. And this didn't fit very well with the research that I had been doing in sociolinguistics and functional linguistics, especially on child language, where as much as a third of the usage that I was seeing in corpora were not full sentences, but were words. And so I made this point to my philosopher colleagues, who pointed out that, well, that's just ellipsis. And then I looked into ellipsis and I found out, no, it's not ellipsis. If you look at what linguists mean by ellipsis, it's really quite different. And when you looked at the evidence from deficits and from cross-linguistic syntax and from language acquisition and from evolution, it became clear that no, the sentence just isn't primary. Now, this can sound very arcane to you, but it has enormous implications for the relationships between language and thought. It has implications for holism in metaphysics and in semantics. So that's what I wrote my dissertation about. Then I went off to Carleton University, where I was CRC in cognitive science, and I sort of expanded my horizons still further, and that's where I started learning about autism spectrum disorder. So this is the second example, and this is an example of applying philosophy to the linguistics, where philosophers of language in the analytic tradition from the 60s up until now have been focused on pragmatics, which is on language use, and in particular on the broader contribution of general cognition to linguistic understanding, as opposed to merely the contribution of specifically knowledge of language. And I had a colleague from back at Glendon who was a functional linguist who had gone into clinical linguistics, and she was explaining to me that it's part of the diagnostic criteria of autism spectrum disorders that people with ASDs have trouble with pragmatics. And she showed me a bunch of texts illustrating the problems. And I noticed all these abilities that they had in pragmatics, all these things that they could do, which my training as a philosopher of language said they shouldn't be able to do if they were bad at pragmatics. And so I became part of a team based at McMaster, and our most recent work shows that there's no difference at all between controls and people diagnosed with ASDs in terms of pragmatic abilities of this special sort that I'll tell you more about later if you want. But anyway, they're far more able than what had ordinarily been understood. And it was really only training in philosophy of language that made it possible for me to see those abilities. So that was very exciting. And then the last example is my most recent book with Oxford and also my blog. Yes, this is a blatant plug. Is about applying work in cutting-edge philosophy of science, because I'm at Western and that's what people do at Western is philosophy of science, applying philosophy of science to linguistics to argue for a much more pluralist and inclusive notion of what it is that linguists can do and the kind of methodologies that linguists can bring to bear than, for instance, one finds in Chomsky, dear to my heart, though he is. Linguistics isn't just part of psychology, it isn't just a social thing, it isn't just an abstract thing, it's all of the above. How much time do I have? A minute and a half. So let me end on a personal note. I was elected this time last year, and I had to postpone my attendance because my mother had fallen ill, and she died 1 year ago Tuesday. And I'd just like to dedicate this extraordinary moment to her memory. So, félicitations à tous mes nouveaux collègues. C'est un honneur et un plaisir de me trouver entre votre compagnie. Bonsoir.
I know that people are probably climbing the wall for but you don't escape that easily from potential questions. Robert, are there, Yolande?
Yes, I have a question because this is exactly what I have been telling to my students, and now I'm in a complete disarray. They have to do sentences, so what should I tell them?
You should tell them that there are genres, and that in certain genres, especially the written genre and belles lettres and things like that, you use a certain kind of style, and complete grammatical sentences are appropriate for that. But there's also the genre of ordering a coffee where you say, coffee, black, 2 sugars, please, double, double. And that in... Sorry?
For the dissertation or for any work, can I accept coffee?
Well, actually, I think for certain literary purposes, sub-sentences are perfectly fine too. So, and you know, I might end by saying thank you, good night, till tomorrow, and that would be perfectly fine.